Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 253, Car Thoughts with Chris Maunu, a Choralosophy podcast first. My Car Thoughts episodes have typically been an inner sanctum of just unscripted ruminations and thinking on my own, which originated from the fact that before there was even a podcast, I used to just do that in my car without a microphone on. I would talk and work out ideas and speak out loud like an absolute crazy person, like a psychopath. But in this episode, I had a guest in my car, so I thought, hey, let's do a Car Thoughts episode with a guest. Chris Maunu and I were riding to the airport in Kansas City discussing how our roles change or don't when leading classroom ensembles versus community-based ensembles of young people. To what degree does our role as an educator shift or modulate? In this engaging discussion, because there was no script, Chris's Munce and Maunu, that's us, explore the nuances of choir education. Reflecting on our recent experiences at a choir camp in Kansas City that I run and started over 10 years ago, Maunu was our guest clinician for the high school age group, and we discussed the differences between school and community choirs. We delve into the challenges posed by the pandemic on music education, the importance of student engagement, and the ways community programs like KSCI and Pacific Youth Choir, where Chris works, can enrich school programs and, in turn, be enriched by them. The conversation highlights the evolving landscape of music education and the strategies educators can employ to inspire and connect with their students. Also, don't miss Chris's recent contribution to the Choralosophy community blog space over at choralosophy.substack.com. His recent blog was on storytelling via repertoire selection, so you don't want to miss that. The link is in the show notes. And as always, if you hear something in this discussion that spurs more conversation or commentary by you, we want you to be a part of the conversation. You can do that over on Substack, or you can do it on the Facebook page, Choralosophers, which is a private group that you can join if you are someone who listens to the show and want to add context or think about the context that you heard here and chime in with your 2 cents. Choir directors, music educators, show planners, you pour your heart into your music. Shouldn't your events get the same attention? That's where Ludus comes in. Sell tickets, promote your concerts, and fundraise with ease. Selling merchandise and concessions? Ludus Retail makes in-person sales effortless. Running choir camps or workshops? They have a classes feature that keeps registration simple, and when you need help, the live support team is ready to pop up with real answers from real people. The best part? It's completely free for organizations. Thousands of music programs already trust Ludus because great music deserves more than just a ticketing system. We all love to travel with our students, but we definitely don't love planning a trip. I know I've been there as the point person for details, and it is a nightmare. Forms, payments, fundraising, it's a never-ending task that takes away from doing what we love. That's where Kaleidoscope Adventures comes in. They've been planning performance trips for more than 30 years and handle all the details from start to finish. And one of the best parts about Kaleidoscope, they have crowdfunding options for every traveler. Contact Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com to find out how they can take your travel beyond expectations. I'm not sure how much, if anything, out there has not gone up in price since 2020, but I know one thing that hasn't, and that is the membership to the Patreon and to the Substack to support this show. The people who are signed up over there as paid subscribers, as my thank you to them, they can get things like t-shirts from the choralosophy.com shop. They can also get access to my Google folder of teaching materials that I've talked about on the show for over the years. And of course, they just want to help make sure that this show can continue. And one of those benefits is a shout out on the show. The producers and inner circle from Patreon are Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, Jonah Clicksbull, Danelle Eckert, David Kowalczyk, Jared Hendricks, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. Okay, so I have never done a Car Thoughts with another person in my car before, and so I think it's fun that it's also a person named Chris.
I love that.
It's a good way to start, if you're going to branch out and have someone else invade your Car Thoughts, at least have it be someone who's like the same name, but then maybe I'll branch out to
way to ease into
someone named Tammy next or something. Yeah, well, welcome.
Thanks, great to be here.
So we just got done having an awesome week of choir camp. What was that like for you?
Oh, it was awesome. I was really honored that Chris asked me to come out and do the KSCI, the Kantorei Kansas City Summer Choral Institute. So I got to work with a great group of high school singers 9th through 12th grade.
It was awesome. It was awesome. And they had a lot of my students in there. A lot of other neighboring school districts had kids there, and Chris just made magic with them, which was awesome. And then I was super excited that Chris also decided to sing in our adult group, which was really fun to get to work with Chris in multiple capacities. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, that was such a cool experience to sing with the pros in Kantorei KC as well as the scholars. It made up a really powerhouse.
Did you end up with in both aspects of it, so singing and directing the kids, did you end up with like favorite musical moments in the performance, whether as a singer and or conductor?
Yeah, well, one piece that you conducted with the scholars in Kantorei KC is the James Macmillan Miserere. That was a piece that I didn't know ahead of time, especially that ending moment where all of this tension that's experienced for, 10 minutes through the piece, and then it finally resolves into this sweet moment at the end. That was super cool.
Yeah, I love it too, and it's tension. What I love about it is that piece is that it's tension, but not just of dissonance. It's tension of rhythm, and the quintuplets and the 5 against 3, and nothing feels settled.
Absolutely.
Until that chorale at the end, which is just some of the most stunning writing in the repertoire, I think. It's been a dream, and that's been a bucket list piece for me. That's awesome. What about with the kids? Did you end up having like a moment that in the concert ended up being your most memorable moment?
Yeah, one piece I included was Jonathan Reed's setting of the beautiful text, Measure Me Sky. And that piece is just written in such a way that it's such a great work to teach expressive details, expressive singing. A lot of these kids are still maybe pretty new to the choral art form, and though they're accomplished singers, there's a lot of knowledge to be had in like, how do you make a phrase sound expressive? How do you bring out an internal voiced consonant in a way that doesn't interrupt the phrase but sort of makes it more vibrant? There are some moments in that piece that I thought the kids did nicely.
Yeah, that group is mostly kids that have been in choir 1 or 2 years in high school, and so they're not super experienced, and getting them a chance to do repertoire like that and do it at a high level is just awesome.
Well, they were pushed pretty hard, and they accepted that environment willingly, and so much progress was made throughout the week. It was really fun to go through that journey with them.
Absolutely. It was great. So as I drive you to the airport, we're going to ruminate on kind of a topic, and if we drift off the topic, it's okay. Everyone knows that that's kind of how it goes here, especially in the car. But the topic is kind of related to the camp we just did. You are a former high school choir teacher. I'm a current high school choir teacher, but I also do this community thing in the summers and sometimes other projects in the community. You're now doing a community organization, Pacific Youth Choir. And so I thought the topic could be like, how does our role as directors and conductors change when we're in a school environment versus when we're in a community environment, or does it? In what ways is it different? In what ways is it similar? I imagine you've thought about that quite a bit lately because of switching jobs.
Absolutely.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I would first say that the core of it, the core of me will never change. Like, my reason for getting up and doing a job where I'm working with kids singing in choir is to help make the world just a little bit better of a place. And inspire kids to see something maybe beyond what they're capable of seeing in themselves. But yeah, when I think about the difference between community choir and school choir, I think about school choir being a little bit more of a focus on access, where like if you're choosing to opt into something like a community choir that you have to audition for, it's a little bit less about that, although we have plenty of initiatives to make sure that we're reaching all the people that we possibly can. But I would say, if you're looking for something additional like that, you're wanting to deepen. So it's maybe a little bit more focus on deepening and broadening the musical experience. So for example, with Pacific Youth Choir, we often perform major works with the Oregon Symphony Orchestra, or sometimes we're hired to do a gig with Thomas Lauderdale and Pink Martini. Just a lot of things that might be a little bit different from what a school choir might be asked to do on a regular basis.
So what would you say would be like I'm just ruminating here, but the similarities would be that, like in a larger youth choir program, you still have levels and you still have training that needs to be done. Like I would imagine for, say, a top group at a community organization, you would still have some kind of a standard, and your hope would be that these kids kind of grow up in the organization and learning how, quote, air quotes, we do things here, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, but you don't see them every day like a teacher does. So
right.
What is the educational, and how much do you focus on that at the different levels?
Yeah, well, I'd say how it's similar is we're still looking at a kid for what their ability to grow will be.
Yeah.
We listen for something that, in a couple of years, this kid is going to really grow into maybe one of the leaders of whatever ensemble they're in. But it is, like you said, when we're seeing kids once a week, you have a little bit less control or direct impact on exactly how quickly their development happens. And I remember when I was teaching high school, like, you have an idea of how a kid might develop, and you still might be wrong about that. So yeah, it's a little more, you have to pay closer attention to perhaps where the kid is right at this moment, and keeping in mind that we're not going to have as much interaction and a direct impact with their growth. So yeah, there is a standard that they have to be at. And, a number of our kids start in kindergarten and go all the way through the program.
Yeah.
So for those kids, there's a lot more consistency in the way the curriculum and development unfolds.
So I would imagine that you don't teach them the basic music fundamentals that you would expect them to learn in school. You're auditioning for those at an age-appropriate level. Is that part of the audition, like kids reading music and stuff like that?
Yes. So not for most of the program, though, because we do invite, let's say a 10th grader who has never done PYC before can come in and do an assessment and join our program right away. However, for like our advanced chamber choir, that's an even shorter rehearsal. So sight reading has to be a part of that audition.
Yeah.
Just because we're counting on pretty strong musical aptitude to make sure that kids can keep up with the level of difficulty and then less time.
Differences for me, at least, when I'm working, say, in ASCI that we just did, and many of those are my students that are there, but I do have a different approach with them in that, kind of like you said, they're opting into this extra thing. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like the standard has to be higher for them, higher for attendance, because we're only here for a week. You can't be sick for 4 days and then still do it. Whereas in school, you come back when you're ready. It's not, to me, it's not a question of being less or more forgiving or lenient or understanding or whatever, but it's a more project focused rather than a lifetime of development and forming of neurons. And when I'm wearing my educator hat, I'm trying to think more of the whole child's need over a long period of time, as opposed to we got to put it together a group for a concert. Do you feel that contrast in your job now versus when you were a teacher?
Yes. So I'm going to go back to what you were talking about with attendance. So, first of all, a kid is probably especially if you think of an accomplished high school freshman or something who's really looking, maybe saw the group perform at the Oregon Symphony or something. They're not joining PYC to see, to dip their toes in to see if they like group singing. Most likely their initial thought is hey, I want to have an experience that, maybe just adds to what I'm already doing in my school program or something. And
right.
So it's more about that. But so yeah, like the beginning of the year, we talk very clearly about what the attendance expectations are. And some kids do decide, they don't want to commit a portion of their weekends every single weekend. They decide to go away. But most kids are so pumped up by the projects we're doing and the wonderful sounds that the choir is making that they're excited to be coming back on a weekly basis.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think as a public school teacher, I have a responsibility to teach any kid who shows up, right? And I don't get to really choose. Yes, in school choirs, oftentimes we have audition groups, but if the goal of the program is to find at least a place for every kid who wants to learn to sing or learn to play an instrument or whatever, your focus would be, I would imagine, wider. With what you're doing now, do you ever feel like you have to, like, I don't know, draw the line with a kid's musical ability? Do you have to, like, cut them? And, like, I'm also thinking about my son's baseball team, and, like, sometimes I have to cut kids. Like, is that a part of your reality at all in a group like yours?
Well, there are some kids that we can tell during the assessment, the audition process, that we can tell may not be a good fit. And that takes on a variety of reasons for that to be the case. So, for example, like maybe a second grader coming in, we're a little bit less concerned about their sight reading experience or something like that at that age. But we are concerned if they come in and they act like they don't want to be there or don't want to sing. So we take that into account with some kids. But it is also a tuition-based program. You know, so the kids that are coming to us really do want to make sure that they're having an experience that's valuable and enriching for the amount of money that they're investing. And so that's part of the equation. You know, the heart of an educator, that's actually probably one of the most difficult things, to switch that mindset a little bit, because I've always been so passionate about people coming into my classroom and trying to teach every single kid that's in front of me.
Right.
Which is, you know, that's the heart of a teacher right there. I still take that approach when I'm in front of all of the kids in Pacific Youth Choir, but again, there's other factors that play into how that's all approached.
That reminds me, when you talk about being tuition based, do you also get the kind of that parent put them there and the kid doesn't really want to be there, the parent just sticks them there? Is that a thing you come across sometimes?
That does happen, and you know, we handle those very similarly to how we would, let's say, if a kid makes the commitment to be in an advanced level school ensemble, it's going to be the same thing. Like, hey, you made this commitment. We sort of expect you to maintain a high level of dedication, at least until your commitment is over at the end of the year. Occasionally, you just, for whatever reason, there's a case where you can't come to that resolution. Maybe you decide to part ways, but this is all pretty.
Right. Another thing I was thinking about in your situation versus a school choir is, how do you deal with, or how do you experience kids coming from multiple school programs with multiple different ways of learning? And maybe so there's the solfege kid, and then there's the numbers kid, or then there's the kid who has, you know, did fixed dough, and then there's the kid or whatever. Like, they all might come with these different systems. What is the approach for bridging all those gaps and leading productive rehearsals?
Yeah, I mean, you might liken it to how somebody would approach like something like what I did this week, or like an honor choir situation.
Yep.
You know, there is a standard of singing ability and an ability to hear. But yeah, I just don't have the time to dig in and do as much educating on solfege like I did when I was a teacher. So I teach them some of the basics and use that as an example, and I will require them to do it. The great thing about PYC, even if there's a kid that doesn't have a lot of experience, there's always quite a bit of experienced singers in the room, so they can sort of lead some of those kids with less experience in those cases. But yeah, it's more focus, I guess you could say, on the artistry and expression and listening. That's something you don't need a lot of experience to learn how to do.
Do they have to learn the music at home? Does it practice tracks and they have with one rehearsal a week? Do they have homework for next week? Like, is that kind of how it works?
Yes, and that's dependent on like where they are in the program, with how much they're invested, so forth. But yeah, they have access to PDFs of their music that they can access online if they lose it, or practice tracks are available for every piece, every singer. And if there is something that I'm looking at, hey, we're 3 weeks from the concert, we still haven't ironed this thing out, everybody needs to spend a little bit of time on this week.
So what is your, you have these kind of changes between school and EYC and school teaching and community music. Has that changed your self-conception at all of like who is Chris Maunu? What does Chris Maunu do? Do you identify as an educator still? Are you a conductor? Are you more of a composer? Like, how does that live in your head?
Yeah, still an educator. What's changed, particularly in my role with PYC, is I do so many school visits across the Portland metro area, and I have seen every level on the spectrum of a school choral program. And that has taught me to be just more open-minded, more flexible in my understanding of, what first of all, what these individual teachers are, the challenges they have in their individual situations, and having compassion for that, and just trying to be there as a support. If I do a local clinic, I never charge anything. It's just something that I now have the time to offer as a service in my community, and I'm just grateful to finally have the time, the flexibility in my schedule to do that.
Right. Yeah, you've been composing more, of course, too, and does this? I imagine this position allows you to do that more. How much time would you say you devote to composing, or are you a follow the whim kind of composer?
Yeah, well, as an ADHD person, I think follow the whim is always going to rule my life a little bit. Okay. So there are periods where I spend more time on it, but I try to do a couple of hours of dedicated time each week, even if it's just trying to come up with something interesting sounding or working on a commission, for example. Yeah, try to stay consistent as much as I can.
Now, do you have composer goals? Do you have or is it just project by project, or do you have certain aspect? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I've started a series with Pavan Publishing. It's actually called the Pacific Youth Choir Choral Series. It works from a variety of levels, mostly middle and high school accessibility, to just provide quality, accessible choral work. So I'd love to expand the reach of that series. And I do see a gap in a lot of the choral repertoire I look at, namely pieces that are accessible but still feel really gratifying and substantial to sing. And so that is an aim. In fact, one of the pieces I did this past week, called Wind of Night, has a lot of just 2 and 4 part texture, very little divisi, accessible range, but I think it has a really kind of exciting accompaniment. It's rhythmic and up-tempo. It has a really rich Romantic era text. So if I can contribute a few of those pieces to the canon, that's exciting to me.
Yeah, so you're it sounds like you're writing with certain types of choirs in mind sometimes. I want to be able to fill a gap for this type of choir. Is that right?
Definitely. And then sometimes I just want to be inspired and write something beautiful.
Yeah. Just write
even if it turns out to be really difficult and nobody will perform it. I think that's important as an artist to, do it for yourself sometimes too.
Have any pieces like that are maybe too hard for kids, but you just wrote it anyway?
Oh, let me think. One thing, it's another one that we did at the camp this past week, is the Silencium, which I don't believe I would have programmed without the Kantorei KC singers with the kids on that piece. That was pretty substantial, important leadership that you provided to this choir. So that would be on the more advanced end of things.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. So, one of the things I was thinking about a lot this week too is that as we come back from pandemic stuff, like just the rebuilding of skills, the gaps that kids are having when they enter music programs that really weren't there before in the same great numbers, the level of importance is of figuring out what rung of the ladder they're currently on. So even though it might not, you and I both taught a long time before the pandemic, and there might have been here's a thing most ninth graders can do. And in a lot of places I know here, that has had to recalibrate.
Yes.
What a ninth grader can do is no longer the same as it was 10 years ago, because a bunch of kids missed, a whole bunch of training and a bunch of just audiation practice and learning to imagine music and think about even just missing performance opportunities, so that kids don't really seem to understand the gravity of and the privilege of performing in the same way. So it's kind of harder to get them to take it seriously. And those are things that I'm hearing from people all over the country. And I imagine you were not at PYC before the pandemic, so you don't have a direct contrast, but is it something that you guys are seeing in Portland too? Do the teachers talk about it? Is it something that you see as kind of a national thing, or is that just something I'm experiencing here?
No, it's definitely a national thing. Not specifically in my role with PYC, but when I go out and spend time with choral directors around the area, I don't know if there's anybody who said that they've 100% bounced back from the pandemic, either in numbers or, kind of the musical level that they were when that all went down. So, it's sink or swim. We have to adapt. A lot of what I'm focusing on right now are things that I can teach a little bit more quickly, albeit listening or how to sing with better diction or articulation or tone production, how to listen better, all that. And, get them excited about like, hey, this is worth spending time on. This is worth getting good at. Yeah, because I think we're maybe in more competition with other things, not necessarily like maybe other music things, but like other youth development. Maybe a kid is a little bit more protective of their time. So instead of, playing an orchestra and singing in choir and playing soccer, they're just going to play soccer.
Yeah. Although I might be a little bit more cynical than you, because I think a lot of that protecting their time is so that they can be on their phone and scroll.
Yeah.
I wish it was because they're involved in all these different activities more than ever. I think sometimes it's really the phones are sucking so much of their attention.
That's a good point.
I got some of my kids to acknowledge, especially the boys. I was having trouble getting boys, as always, to sign up for extra stuff. Like they'll do the bare minimum even with choir. But why don't you come do the Monday night group, or why don't you come do the summer camp, or whatever? And the boys typically went, I don't know. And I would just say directly to them, so be honest. Your first thought when I asked you was this was going to cut in on your gaming time. And they were like, yeah, okay, you're honest. Yep, that's what I was thinking about. And I was like, well, okay, so is that the best reason to not do something like this? And so I can actually get some of them to do it because they realize how stupid their thought was. But yeah, it's an interesting thing, but because I agree, I just wonder sometimes too, though, the types of repertoire we choose. You mentioned it earlier, this like gap of music. It has to be, as always, I think, relevant to them, or be able. Well, I could rephrase that. It could be made relevant to them by a good director and teacher who can help them see why it's relevant.
Oh, sure.
It doesn't always need to be obviously relevant, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But I don't think that's new. That's in all teenagers forever, always, back in our generation and before. That they've always needed that. But I think because of that time thing that you mentioned, we have to be able to win them over quicker. So partly because their attention spans are shorter.
Yes.
And so that just, I feel like it results in a completely different type of pedagogy. What do you find to work, for example, in that way? Like, what are your go-tos?
I think the go-tos are a lot of the same. Really engaging repertoire. As an introverted person, I have to work really hard to make sure I'm engaging and have a certain level of charisma. The podium, so it's probably just a more elevated version of that, combined with, the tension of not having necessarily quite the right material to fit exactly what kids need on a particular thing, whether it's a level of piece of music. So to me, it's not a complete shift in, like, I'm going to burn everything to the ground and just start fresh. It's more of, I think we always need to adapt, change, and develop, and always need to be aware of what the changing needs of our kids are.
Say more about being an introvert and needing to work on having charisma, or making sure, like, what is that like for you, and how do you self-monitor? Like, hey, I'm being boring right now, or like, how does that work?
Well, this is a whole nother episode, but
great.
It's something. It's something. I feel like our choral profession rightly does have inclusion practices on the forefront of our mind, and I think sometimes introverted people might be passed over just because they're not necessarily the first one to, like, if there's an opportunity, like, hey, I'm going to take that. I got this. They're maybe a little bit too polite. I don't know.
Yeah.
I've been accused of that. Chris, you're just too nice. It's actually letting go of self-monitoring that I find is helpful, where I've developed enough confidence through the years to know that I'm good at what I do, and I can just let all of the baggage go and be with my kids and be the very best version of me, not trying to be someone else. That makes sense.
Yeah, so you don't feel like you have to kind of put on a show to be more engaging. You feel like it's by kind of getting past the shutting yourself down out of shyness that allows you to just open up a little bit.
Yeah, it's letting the work is pushing away the fear and the self-doubt and the anxiety and allowing my truest, most authentic self. If we don't believe in ourselves, our students aren't going to believe in us. So there's a certain work toward making sure that they see, like, wow, my teacher is really true to themselves. They're authentic. They're passionate. And yes, at the same time, when I do a week-long gig, I'm tapped out socially. So it's also about finding me time, finding time to unwind and put in a podcast and refresh when I can.
Right. Yeah, I also agree that clinician work and advancement in our profession can be trickier based on personality. And I would also say I've seen it even just in the average local director who might be struggling with their program, oftentimes is personality related. It's not because they're not good enough musician or because they pick bad music or anything like that. It's just that there's a difficulty sometimes for some people to connect with kids, which I always attribute to authenticity. I don't think you have to have a certain type of personality to connect with kids. But I do feel like kids, especially teenagers, middle school and high school, can sniff inauthenticity even better than adults.
Yep.
Even better than adults can sometimes. I think they can tell when you're putting on a show.
Yeah.
Agreed?
If I get up on the podium and start hopping around and just wildly flailing and being loud and whatnot, the students would be like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But it's also, I think there is a self-awareness piece that, if there is a little bit of a gap and like, maybe I don't find that I'm connecting with students as well as I could, or maybe I'm not a huge fan of the awkward icebreakers, but I can recognize that some kids could really benefit from that and, community building. So it is important to, I don't think we need to look at ourselves as like, these are all my terrible weaknesses. But, if you look at something that somebody else has, I think it's okay to stay authentic to you, but also like work hard to keep getting, because it's part of our craft.
Yeah.
Right? We should continue to better ourselves authentically.
Right. So since you brought it up, what are some of your terrible weaknesses?
Well, I'm not going to call them terrible weaknesses when I'm having my positive self-talk, Chris. Yeah, talk about icebreakers. That was something for a long time, I'm like, that's just not me. So I'm not going to do them. And every year, when I was teaching high school, my senior leadership team would come up to me and like just beg us to do stuff. And I was like, okay. So I researched them and I found things that I could get excited about doing, and it paid off. So yeah, that's definitely something. In terms of like as a professional colleague in our profession, I actually have a hard time like speaking up about my accomplishments, and I've had to put that fear of like, what are people going to think if I share my work on social media or whatever. And so that's been something to work on and overcome.
That's an Enneagram 9 thing, though.
It is. Yeah,
that's classic.
Well, 9 wing 1 too. You have ideas that you think about social justice or whatever, but at the same time you're too afraid to stir the pot too much. So.
Right, to like take up space in a conversation or in a room, so to speak, and sit back and just listen.
Yeah, my number one fear is probably like I don't want to be seen as the person who's talking too much, which again is like it's not true. So it's something I've had to work on. Speaking up when I have an idea and not worrying about how that might come across.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting because I did one of my very first episodes that I did was just called "What I Suck At." It was like my 5th episode. I found it therapeutic to just go through the list of things that I don't think I do very well, because at that time there wasn't even a guest on that episode. I just turned on a microphone and started talking about all the things I am afraid of doing as a choir director, and all the way from like playing piano. My piano skills are terrible. I mean, they're better now than they were 20 years ago, but they're not what I wish that they were. My rhythm reading is not nearly as good as my pitch reading. I have to think really hard about the division of the beat. It's not something that comes super naturally to me. If it's, like all the way from that to like the interpersonal things, like it's difficult for me to how other people need varying degrees of feedback. And because I'm it's hard for me because I don't really need it. If my way of being in the world is I assume that if I'm okay with everyone, that they know it, and if they're okay with me, then I know it too. And
right.
If there was a problem, they would have said something, and that kind of thing. And so oftentimes I will not give the feedback someone else needs because I don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just figure everything's fine. So and as a teacher, I feel like that is such a crucial skill. And so we are working on musical skills to get better all the time, but we're also working on, the room. How do I tell how to differentiate my way of talking to this person who needs this type of communication to this person? Because our jobs are so public. We talk to so many different types of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most people don't understand what it's like to do what we do.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's on display. All of your best work, best and worst moments
Constantly
are on display.
Yep.
Do you kind of have a way of, I guess, to know? Maybe kind of we're almost to the airport, so this might be our last little thing to talk about. So, with kids that you only see once a week in your community organization, taking it back to that, how do you get to know them? Like, how do you get to know how to talk to them? Like I was just saying, like I know my students because I see them every day for 4 years. How does that work?
Yeah, and again, that's something I've had to make some intentional effort toward. We do a full weekend retreat at the start of the year, which really helps. Everybody comes there and we spend a lot of time getting to know each other and establishing trust and culture, and along with musical expectations. And then just, again, putting myself forward when students show up, making sure I learn their names as quickly as possible, and call kids by their name. Take 5 seconds to say something positive to them, or just, hey, Bill, I'm so happy to see you. So again, it's the same. I think it's the same concept of what you do as a public school teacher, but it's condensed in a shorter time frame.
Sure.
There's more intentionality, and then in terms of rehearsal planning, you have more. I don't know, at least I wouldn't plan out minute by minute every class every day, especially after I got my feet under me as an educator. It would be more brief, like, hey, I need to work on this section of a piece, and you kind of know after a certain amount of time exactly how that's going to take. But I found I've had to go back to like a minute by minute plan just to make, because if I don't get to something, then it's 2 weeks go by before you get to it again. So
that's funny. That's how I am with Kantorei, but I am not like that at school. At school, I just walk in and wing it.
Yeah.
But with the Kantorei rehearsal, there aren't other rehearsals later to make up for the fact that we forgot to do that one song.
Exactly.
Or whatever.
Whoops, I'll get to it tomorrow.
Yeah, right. There is no tomorrow. Exactly. That's the difference. Yeah. No, with the little kids in your organization, I know you direct the high school groups, but do you also make an effort to like at least know them so that when they're older and they're in your groups, and I know you haven't been there very long, but how important is that aspect of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then when kids change levels, so for example, 5th grade to 6th grade, they change from elementary to high school. There's an assessment that happens at that point. Same thing with middle to high school. And then we try to do things together, have the middle school perform with the high school kids on a concert, interact that way. And then I do some supervision of my team of conductors, not to just be on their case, but just making sure that we continue to have a strong alignment through all levels of our program. And so the kids I may not be able to name all of the first graders by their full name, but knowing who the families are, showing my face, getting to make sure that they know who I am, at least, that can be really helpful, I think.
That's awesome. Well, Chris, I hope you have a safe flight back. We're almost to the airport. Thanks for doing this with me.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a fun week, and fun to do your very first Comedians in Car Getting. Although there are people far funnier than.
That would be an interesting choral segment. Maybe I'll have to think about that. Choral musicians in cars getting coffee.
There you go.
Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code, and of course now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, Going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.